Well, good morning. I'm Commissioner Donald Palmer with the Election Assistance Commission. My guest today is Katharine Clark, who has served as a Santa Fe County clerk since 2021. As clerk, she's been focused on modernizing elections and training in New Mexico. Central to this goal is the implementation of a debriefing program, allowing election workers to directly communicate their feedback to staff and leadership. In addition to these efforts, the office launched a mentorship program for new presiding election judges to shadow the more experienced counterparts. These endeavors also helped her office earn an honorable mention from the EAC's 2023 Clearinghouse Awards. Katharine, thank you for joining us today. Congratulations. I'm excited to hear about the ways your office is improving the poll worker experience.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure, and yes, we love our poll workers, and so we're always trying to find ways of making the experience better and how to recruit and retain them.
So to begin with, describe the debriefing program and how it's positively impacted the entire election worker training program.
So we identified, in 2021, I'd taken office, and it was during the period of COVID. And a lot of our longtime poll workers in 2020 were of an older age, and so they actually did not be poll workers. And so my predecessor had to scramble to try to find poll workers. Many of those newly recruited poll workers actually decided they didn't want to do it again because it was actually a very stressful election in 2020. And so it was this idea of how do we look at ways in which we can improve the experience of being a poll worker. How do we look at ways of finding places to recruit them? So we actually had a Google kind of application where people were applying to be poll workers. And then we realized, okay, we have this group of people who have been with us through thick and thin. How do we identify those people as being, more of those in the community, and how do we get them into the poll worker program? One of the best ways of doing that is creating a debriefing program so that we can measure essentially what was positive, what was negative, what we can improve. And so we actually meet with all of our presiding judges and election judges in person in debriefing groups. And they go over with the training process with us, with the actual experience, how their support was during the election, what we can improve. And then we actually send out a questionnaire because we hire 400 people. So for people who are just our election clerks, we actually send them a very extensive questionnaire. And those metrics actually are the same election to election. So that way we can measure our improvement over time on certain metrics. For instance, like how much support there was, what our training was like. And then what we do is we meet afterwards with our staff, and we identify 5 things that we can improve every election for our poll workers. And our poll workers really do appreciate being able to be part of that process. And I think there's this idea of shared ownership. If they are also debriefing and part of the election process and help us come up with things we can improve, then they also feel ownership over the election, and they're much more likely to be retained because we're asking, what worked, what didn't. We're very open to what you think. So that way, next time we can improve. And of course, they always appreciate seeing some of their suggestions implemented. And I think it's really important that, our poll workers are an important part of the election process, and they feel that we are listening to them because they are our boots on the ground.
So it sounds like it's really like a systematic way of getting that communication back to you as clerk, having those open channels of communication. Is there an example of a change that you implemented based on that, a sort of line of communication directly back to you after every election process?
Certainly. So one of our challenges always was supplies. So actually based on the way that poll workers had said, I couldn't find this thing or couldn't find that, we actually started creating a checklist where they have to check off all their supplies when they pick them up. And we have matching checklists. We have our checklist, they have a checklist, and together we check off all the supplies. We also pack our boxes differently, so that way it's easier to find things. And we actually also implemented a, what would I call it? What is the word I'm looking for? I'm sorry, I'm blanking. A barcoding program, essentially, where we have a supply barcoding. So when we pack our boxes, we're actually using barcodes to essentially track what materials went into our boxes and which materials were transported to the polling sites. Because of, it's very stressful when they're checking in, they only have an hour. It's sort of, we started packing our boxes based on the point of view of the poll worker, not on the point of view of the election worker, who of course knows where everything is, our permanent staff who knows where everything is. We're packing our boxes based on the idea that the presiding judge may have done this a few times, but they may have a lot of clerks that are brand new. And so we have to make things obvious and label them in an obvious way. And we also, for our packing boxes, actually take pictures of what it is we're talking about. So that way a clerk that has been assigned to unpack the box can easily find the materials they're looking for.
So I don't want to digress too much, but in the military, there's a lot of debriefing, for example, of pilots after they come back from a mission or something like that. And
Yeah.
I always felt that you're part of the greater organization when your input is coming back to leadership and they're responding to that. And it created a sense of camaraderie that, it was very important what you were doing and that you accurately report how things are going. Do you sense that as well? From your poll workers when you involve them in a program like this?
Yeah, so I have an MBA, and actually my dad did 22 years in the Air Force. So a debrief is very, very important.
Yes.
So I come from a military family, and that was one of the things that we really wanted to implement. And, this idea that, staff need to be deep, so whether you talk about it in terms of stakeholders, like in business school, or whether you talk about it in terms of military debrief, right? Having your whole organization being able to give feedback, including your actually voters, right? We have a QR code on our wall when you're leaving. So if you want to give us feedback, you can, fill out that instant yes or no, that went well, that didn't. So that way we can track in these metrics and work for continuous improvement. One of the values in our office is always this idea of continuous improvement. And you can't continuously improve unless all the stakeholders have a chance of letting you know what worked and what didn't, and any ideas they have, right? With not all ideas can come from the clerk or the staff, right? Poll workers come up with great ideas because, they're the ones who are implementing the election.
So debriefing, can you explain a little bit about your office, its mentorship program?
Yes.
How that was created and the advice that you might give to another election office to implement a similar program?
Yes. So one of the things we identified was the idea that our poll workers are aging out. So many of those who had left in 2020 and then come back had told us, I really can't do this more than a couple years. Like, I'm here because I really believe in what we're doing, but also I'm aging out. I don't want to drive at night. There's a lot of reasons why people no longer want to be poll workers. A lot of them has to do with just becoming older and not being able to do a 16, 17, 18-hour day, driving at night, and then, the kind of the stress of it. Being a presiding judge is very, very stressful, especially during early voting, because it's a longer period of time. We have 28 days of early voting. And it's managing a bunch of people at these very large sites, a lot of technology. And so people tend to age out, whether they just want to be retired and not do poll working anymore, or they want to spend time with their grandchildren, they want to travel, or they just simply don't want to drive at night, is one of the reasons we're seeing that people don't want to be poll workers. But we have a lot of new people coming in and no way to transpose that experience, right? Being a poll worker, no matter how much you train them, that 4 hours of training just really isn't enough to be a presiding judge. And so the idea is that the mentorship program is really to identify people who have come into the organization and are election clerks, or, maybe have very applicable job experience, particularly military experience, or being a manager at a different job. But essentially, we knew that we would need to translate, and not just in 4 hours, this idea of being a presiding judge. And so what we've done is, during the early voting period, when it's less stressful, we ask some of our people who are going to be new presiding judges to shadow some of our very, very experienced presiding judges we've had for 20 years, to kind of go over the day, what it looks like to start up, what it looks like to manage difficult situations, what it looks like to handle the technology, to delegate positions within the polling site, essentially, right? Some people have to manage the tabulator, some people have to manage the ballot on demand system. And then they kind of get a sense of what the workflow is, because that's something you can't really explain, no matter how much we have like a real-time polling site when we do the training, it really doesn't translate unless you're sort of standing there with a presiding judge and getting from them why they manage their polling site the way they do. And that actually gives a lot of confidence to our new presiding judges. And of course, we don't throw them in the deep end of a very large site. We give them a smaller site and only election day. But the idea is that we mentor them so that way they feel confident. So then they can become a presiding judge that one day will be that 20-year veteran also mentoring the next generation of presiding judges. And that's how we retain people too, right? We don't want to throw people into the deep end because we've certainly had that experience where we've had a presiding judge, they had kind of a bad experience, whether there's a technology challenge or the power went out or something like that. And, we as the office is like, oh, this is no big deal. We always have contingency plans. But when you're a baby presiding judge, it can be really stressful, and that might be the reason why you don't come back. So we're always trying to sort of create this sense of confidence. No matter what happens, we're going to support you. And one of the ways of creating that confidence is that mentorship, so that they know, oh, challenges come up and this is how we manage them. And it's this is normal part of being a presiding judge, and you can handle it just like this presiding judge has handled it.
Great aspects of this program. Katharine, what are some of the tactics that you use? I mean, we're now talking on or around National Public Recruitment Day or Help America Vote Day. What are some of the tactics you use to encourage people to serve as a poll worker or an election worker in Santa Fe County?
So I will say that we have a very active population in Santa Fe County. So I will provide that caveat. We actually have a lot of people during the year who are signing up. So one of the things we do is we have an outreach program. We want to have visibility. So we make sure that our office has a lot of visibility in our community events. Pride was just this last weekend. It's one of our largest registration events. And it's also one of our events that we see a lot of people sign up. So, we have a QR code on our outreach desk, and essentially and it just says in big letters, sign up to be a poll worker, and people will sign up using our Google application. It's like just a Google form, and they sort of provide, their different skills and what they can do. And then during the year, we're calling them and kind of onboarding them and trying to figure out where they could fit in the organization. A lot of people end up being standby, which is a very important role because, we have dropouts, we have people who get sick, and we always need to be able to have a contingency plan for people to be able to come in, especially the lower level clerks where we can easily fill those slots. But we are actually doing recruitment throughout the year every time I go on media, I talk about it. Every time we have a community event, we try to have visibility in the clerk's office. We always make sure that application is on our website and easy to find. We post on social media a lot. So we have a very active social media presence. We have found our large community groups on Facebook involving Santa Fe. And we're always posting about, hey, make sure to sign up to be a poll worker. So we have this strategy around communication and trying to make sure that people know that one of the ways in which they can best serve their community and make sure that they serve our democracy is by being a poll worker. We give you all the tools to be able to do it, and it feels really good to be able to be part of making sure that your neighbor can vote. And that's the messaging we use to make sure that people know that this is a great way of serving your community. And we're constantly recruiting and interviewing and trying to get people ready. So that way, when we start putting slots up for training, we can fill those slots and, basically have a full force of people who not only are assigned, but actually are on standby.
Oh, this is great. Katharine Clark, thank you for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you for having me, and
As
happy poll worker recruitment day.
Well, as you know, poll workers are essential to ensuring elections are a success. And so
Yes.
as we celebrate National Poll Worker Recruitment Day, the EAC is encouraging those interested in becoming poll workers to learn more about visiting helpamericavote.gov. Thank you, Katharine.
Thank you.